Hello, and thank you for joining us for a webinar on COVID-19 impacts on pharmaceutical manufacturing operations and related FDA guidance. My name is Commander Tara Gooen Bizjak, and I work in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at FDA. Within FDA, I work in the Office of Compliance, where our mission is to shield patients from poor quality, unsafe, and ineffective drugs through proactive compliance strategies and risk-based enforcement action. And within Office of Compliance, I work in the Office of Manufacturing Quality. We evaluate compliance with current good manufacturing practice. You'll often hear the acronym CGMP for drugs based on inspection reports and evidence gathered by FDA investigators. We also develop and implement compliance policy and take regulatory actions to protect the public from adulterated drugs in the U.S. market. Prior to and during COVID-19, we've also been working to increase patient access to critically needed medications in shortage. So today, I'm going to focus on 3 COVID-related manufacturing guidances. The first, published in 2011, is the guidance for industry on planning for the effects of high absenteeism to ensure availability of medically necessary drug products. And the second 2 were published in 2020, specific to COVID-19, and those are CGMP considerations for responding to COVID-19 infection in employees in drug and biological products manufacturing, as well as resuming normal drug and biologic manufacturing operations during the COVID-19 public health emergency. You'll notice that one of these guidance documents was published before COVID-19 started, and I will talk more about that. But specifically, you'll see that we have been very proactive issuing guidance either before COVID-19 pandemic or as issues arise during the pandemic. We have been issuing guidance at an unprecedented rate to address issues that have come before us and are related to COVID-19. So I'm going to focus on the responding to infection in employees guidance first. So this guidance was published in June 2020, and the purpose of the guidance is to prevent or mitigate potential adverse effects on the safety and quality of drugs from an infected or potentially infected employee engaged in drug manufacturing. So basically, what should you do if you have an infected or potentially infected employee with COVID-19? So bottom line up front, the lots or batches that are adversely affected in terms of safety or quality must not be distributed. But there's a lot of details and recommendations that we provide in this guidance to help along this path. So first of all, in terms of our requirements, CGMP requirements, employees must be excluded from drug manufacturing areas in accordance with the applicable CGMP requirements who either test positive for COVID-19 or have symptoms of COVID-19. And you'll see references to specific regulations on the right here. These are the 21 CFR 211, 212, 600 references, as well as a reference to our guidance document for CGMP for active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is the Q7 reference that I mentioned here. So you'll also see in the guidance that when it was published, certainly the science and the recommendations were the most current. However, we have learned more. There's been more recommendations, and so we encourage you to use that updated information as well in making your determinations, risk-based determinations in this guidance that we'll talk about. So as I mentioned, risk management principles, quality risk management principles are a very strong theme in this guidance, as well as in CDER policy over the last at least couple decades. So a couple things. So in accordance with quality risk management principles, drug manufacturers are expected to take the following steps to prevent or mitigate potential adverse effects on the safety and quality of drugs. Okay, so the idea of using those quality risk management principles to be proactive is part of the recommendations. and then also to ensure compliance with CGMP requirements, which is important to ensure drugs are not adulterated. Drug product manufacturers must ensure that all evaluations, including risk assessments, to determine if drug safety or quality were adversely affected, as well as any follow-up and changes, are approved by the manufacturer's quality unit and properly documented within the manufacturer's quality management system. So this is all part of the risk assessment of if you know that you have a potentially infected employee. So that is where I wanted to focus for the for that considerations guidance. You'll see that that's from June 2020. As I mentioned, there is updated information that you can find through our CDC website, and those references are in the guidance. So I wanted to turn also to another guidance that was published in 2011, Planning for the Effects of High Absenteeism to Ensure Availability of Medically Necessary Drug Products. So this was originally developed after H1N1, a pandemic, but not COVID-19 specific. And you'll see that through this guidance, we're also encouraging a risk-based approach, a very proactive approach, to really encourage manufacturers specifically of medically necessary drug products and related components to develop emergency plans and methods to make associated decisions through the process. So I was in a meeting, an external meeting over a year ago, probably back in April 2020 or May 2020, and I mentioned this guidance, and it was just silence. There was not much knowledge that this guidance was out there. And so if you have not heard of it, or even if you have heard of it, I encourage you to take a look at this guidance and open it up. There is a lot of great information in there, and I'm going to talk about some of it, but I'm only going to touch on some of the highlights for this presentation. But I encourage you to look at more details because this is really about establishing a plan and having those plans in place so that if there is, an emergency scenario, just like we have been in now during this current pandemic, you'll have a plan to help, even if you don't need to implement it. So the key for this guidance and the recommendation is really to plan ahead. Having a written emergency plan to maintain an adequate supply of medically necessary products is key here. So within this emergency plan, what we describe and recommend is having a criteria for plan activation that can be based on various factors, can be based on resourcing within different organizational units or a threshold for a certain level of absenteeism, and considering at what point you would reallocate resources to medically necessary products, at what point you would consider outsourcing to other entities like contract labs or manufacturers, and thinking about that in a proactive way. The written emergency plan should also identify decision points and decision makers. So the decision point and who can decide when to activate a plan, when to deactivate a plan, and then manufacturing decisions along the way is also something that should be part of your plan. And then last, the emergency, well, not last, there are many different factors, but I'm just providing a few highlights here. Having prospective quality risk assessments on prioritizing medically necessary products and CGMP activities. And this is where I'm going to get into some more detail in a couple of slides. One quote that I wanted to really highlight here is the importance of being aware of your suppliers and your contractors' responses to personnel shortages. So, of course, it may not be the scenario that just your company is affected. Your suppliers and your contractors may also be affected by high absenteeism. And so it's really important to work with them to make sure that you ensure the availability of having the materials that you need to manufacture and the services that contribute to the manufacture of those medically necessary products, and really about having that communication pathway and relationship even before you need to implement a plan like this. So having a written emergency plan is not necessarily just within a single company. It's having that plan extend as appropriate to your important suppliers and service providers. The guidance also goes into additional preparation for emergencies, so additional activities such as employee education, encouraging immunization, encouraging employees to have a family emergency preparedness plan, and encouraging good sanitation practices, and restricting ill or sick employees from production areas in the first place. So that really opens up the importance of having a strong quality culture that will enable employees to be absent if needed, so that they are not coming into work and potentially infecting and getting other people sick. So I said I was going to talk a little bit more about these prospective quality risk assessments. So the way that I see this is really through a cascade approach, identifying this cascade approach on which activities, well, first of all, focus on reallocating resources to meet medically necessary product demand. So that's number one in terms of this quality risk assessment, and identifying what activities to modify. And then the second is to identify which activities, CGMP activities, that might be reduced in frequency, delayed, or substituted by a suitable alternative, and ensure that the anticipated actions are not expected to unacceptably reduce the assurance of product quality. And again, I look at this as a cascade approach for these CGMP activities. So first, after reallocating resources as needed to medically necessary products, the quality risk assessment would identify and consider which activities the quality risk assessment would document which activities your firm has identified as those that are intended by the CGMP regulations to provide controls not connected with the manufacturing of any specific batch. And examples provided in the guidance include routine maintenance of production equipment, performance checks and maintenance of utility systems, environmental monitoring of facilities during production, stability testing for certain drug products and components, and periodic examinations of data and of reserve samples. So if the demand cannot be met by these measures, consider reducing activities that are more directly connected with batch manufacturing or a product accept reject decision. So that's the cascade effect I was talking about. So examples provided in the guidance are not requiring a second person verification of activities for less critical steps, reducing the number of samples for labor-intensive laboratory testing, foregoing an in-process test to assure adequacy of mix, particularly when making successive batches, where the risk of safety and efficacy is judged to be low, and delaying completion of deviation investigations of minor events. So those are the examples of CGMP activities that are described in the guidance as ones that, if using a risk-based approach, may be considered to be as CGMP deviations. So some important factors to note for this approach. So for all CGMP controls that are delayed, reduced in frequency, or substituted with a suitable alternative, it's really important to maintain documented rationale and risk assessment to show that the proposed changes will not unacceptably reduce assurance of product quality. It's also important to carefully monitor indicators of product quality to note any unfavorable trends or shifts as a result of the implementation of the emergency plan. So for example, your certain pieces of equipment are on a certain preventive maintenance schedule. That should be properly justified based on the equipment. If you are extending the or increasing the reducing the frequency between those preventative maintenance activities, then it's important to look at the performance of the equipment, as there may be other signals or indicators that there may be a problem with that equipment that may then affect drug quality of batches that are manufactured on that equipment. So there may be other flags that you can look for in manufacturing if you're reducing or delaying certain CGMP activities or substituting them. Another recommendation is to retain samples for testing at a later date in cases where testing is reduced or omitted because of lack of resources. So in terms of the guidance recommendations, we recommend that you notify us when the plan is activated and when returning to normal operations. This is to help maintain awareness of any potential shortage situations, and there is an email in the guidance. And then in accordance with existing reporting requirements, if you identify a released product which may be defective, contact CDER immediately, and we can be in communication to remedy the situation. So I wanted to provide and share some examples of notifications that we've received, some that are consistent with the guidance and some that are not consistent with the guidance, and I'll get into that. Just a disclaimer, these examples are generalized descriptions. We've received more than 3 notifications, and I've grouped where appropriate and for example here. They're not specific to certain firms. Okay, so the first example I wanted to highlight is that we have received multiple notices of plan activation, as I mentioned, from various companies, and some have activated and deactivated multiple times, which means that they have a particular threshold, if you will, or specific decision point when to activate or deactivate. So that's very helpful for us to see. In the first example I wanted to talk about, we received, this is a generalized description, multiple companies, but in this first example, this notification included a list of the medically necessary products which were being prioritized, included a date of activation. It also included the absenteeism threshold for deactivation. So when they plan to deactivate their plan. So these were all very helpful notifications that we basically include, in the as useful information, and we can include that, share that with subsequent investigators as inspections resume. It can help provide a good picture of the proactive nature and the risk assessments that you use during the pandemic. A second example of notification that we received is one that did not include an indication of prioritizing medically necessary product. There was just no discussion at all of the guidance or that resources were reallocated in order to maintain production of those needed products. And it also included a notification that CGMP activities associated with batch release were reduced. So specifically, release of components and intermediates and recovered solvents were done without any testing and just upon receipt of the certificate of analysis from a supplier. Also references to delays in stability testing of validation batches or process performance qualification batches, PPQ batches. And so those batches are important to make sure that either your new process or any changes in your process, you have representative product on stability. So that's also an example that's not described in the guidance as an example of a CGMP activity which can be delayed according to the recommendations in the guidance. And then delays in preparation, review, and approval of certain quality activities, such as investigations into out-of-specification results, without indicating that those batches were quarantined and held until resolution of the investigations, appropriate resolution. The third example is one where it's not a notification through this pathway that I just described. Rather, it was a notification received via post-marketing submission for an approved application, so like a CBE 0 or CBE 30, requesting certain waivers and CGMP waivers, such as certain tests that are required under CGMP or skip lot release testing, which means reduced or no release testing of batches prior to distribution. Again, these are examples that are outside of the guidance, and it should not be. This pathway is also not the pathway that's described in the guidance in terms of submitting something to your application. So rather, we recommend that you follow the notification process, and if needed, it may require discretion, and Commander Thakur is going to talk about that in the follow-up in the next presentation. So in the guidance states CDER is prepared to exercise enforcement discretion in such cases as appropriate to meet the national public health needs, so long as the product remains safe and effective. So if you have a scenario where you have prioritized your medically necessary products, you followed the recommendations in the guidance, and you're still in a place where you need additional support, that may require formal FDA regulatory discretion. So, we encourage you to, come in and talk to us, because those scenarios really require that discretion discussed with the agency ahead of time. Okay, now I'm going to turn to the third guidance, which is resuming normal operations. This was published in September 2020. It is a COVID-specific guidance and recognizes the specific risks associated with COVID-19. So this guidance describes methods to plan and prioritize the products that you manufacture. So for example, medically necessary products, and returning to normal CGMP operations, so your previous CGMP operations, and encourages and recommends considering risk of shortage of the products that you manufacture, and it also encourages developing an established plan. So ideally, the coming up with a plan is not one that it's not something that happens at the point where you say, hey, we're ready to resume normal operations, let's come up with a plan. We recommend that this is something that you develop ahead of time so that you can do this in a thoughtful way. And also the guidance talks about that CGMP requirements remain in effect during the COVID-19 public health emergency. This guidance is not intended to describe FDA's enforcement priorities. So this guidance does not say, if you did this specific activity during periods of high absenteeism and now you're returning to normal operations, this is the, these are scenarios where we would take enforcement action. This guidance is not, does not cover that. It's really a guidance and recommendations and a risk-based approach on how to how to resume normal operations, and that's where this guidance focuses, because we know that some of these decisions are difficult to make, and so it does not cover our enforcement priorities. So again, this guidance is also very risk-based, as I mentioned. Strongly encourages utilizing a risk management approach to prioritize resumption activities. And for those activities which were delayed, reduced, or otherwise modified, identifying the deviations from CGMP and identifying necessary remediations to those deviations that then ensure drug quality, or ensure drug quality during manufacturing, distribution, and then continue to ensure drug quality. And of course, where critical CGMP activities were delayed, interrupted, or reduced in frequency, the batch should be quarantined and the decision to approve the batch delayed until remediation activities are complete. And investigations into these critical deviations should continue to be a high priority during COVID-19. If there is a critical deviation, that may call into question your process and the state of control of your process. So that's important to continue to be a high priority to ensure that future batches that are manufactured or previous batches that were manufactured and distributed do not have the same issue that was identified during that particular batch. So in going through the resuming normal operations recommendations, so some examples of remediation and questions to consider. So were there investigations into non-critical product or process discrepancies and unresolved deviations, and addressing how to address those in a risk-based approach? And I mean that in terms of prioritization of addressing those investigations and unresolved deviations. A decision to delay or reduce testing less directly or not associated with the batch. And as I mentioned before, a decision to delay or reduce testing directly considered with the batch or a product accept or reject decision should generally be avoided. And that would be part of your emergency plan during high absenteeism. Definitely, and this was a theme before, the importance of thinking about the impact of COVID-19 on your suppliers. In terms of receiving materials from your suppliers is really important. That's what I mentioned earlier in the guidance on the high absenteeism. But then resuming normal operations, it's important to reach out to your suppliers and your contractors and say, hey, what kind of activities did you need to delay? Did any of that potentially impact the quality of product? Are you still evaluating certain aspects of your GMP operations because you delayed some activities? So it's just important to stay in contact and have that good communication with your suppliers and contractors. So that is also part of our recommendations on resuming normal operations. And then any changes or interruptions to facilities and equipment, as I mentioned earlier, so delaying preventive maintenance, delaying some environmental monitoring, what kind of remediation is important to make sure that your process and your facility and your equipment is now adequate for its intended use and was adequate at the time that you manufactured product during periods of high absenteeism as well. So these are all questions to consider when resuming normal operations. So I have this tiny little figure here on the slide that some of you may recognize. This is the figure 1 from the quality risk management guidance. This is FDA, ICH and then FDA's Q9 quality risk management guidance, and provides a great risk management framework to use in many situations, including this situation, that will lead you through assessing the risk, controlling the risk, and then managing the risk over the entire life cycle of that either situation or the product life cycle. And so we really encourage you to use the findings and conclusions from this kind of risk management approach. Also recommending, as I mentioned, providing high priority to remediation activities that are specific for products in shortage or at risk of shortage. We also recognize that some activities must be conducted prior to restarting production, but some may be accomplished in tandem. And this may be a fluid process. As I mentioned before, in terms of notifications, we have seen notification of activation of the emergency plan and then deactivation, and then a reactivation and deactivation. So we recognize that this may be a fluid process. And so using this kind of risk-based approach and this process that has been established through an emergency plan and then subsequent risk management activities during resuming normal operations is really helpful. And we recognize that that's a fluid, that can be a fluid process. So in summary, guidance is available for manufacturing during COVID-19, and the three that I talked about today are responding to infections in employees, handling high absenteeism, and resuming normal operations. And specific to this point, the importance of appropriate justification and documentation cannot be underscored here. From a manufacturing perspective, when you have high absenteeism, there may be relaxation of standards in terms of documenting what happened and what practices happened, and it can be very difficult to then go back and piece together those decisions that were made. So I encourage you to make sure that you have a plan in place to document those decisions and the justifications that are made. And then I anticipate that at some point your manufacturing site will be inspected as well, and so there may be questions either from a regulatory authority or from one of your customers, and they may ask, why did you do this, or what happened at this point? So documentation here is really, really important into how you justified and decided to do what you did. Second, CDER is prepared to exercise enforcement discretion in such cases as appropriate to meet the national public health needs, so long as the product remains safe and effective. So as I mentioned, any CGMP deviations beyond the examples of the guidance may require formal FDA regulatory discretion, and Commander Thakur will talk more about that in the next presentation. Last, OMQ works to minimize consumer exposure to unsafe, ineffective, potentially dangerous, or poor quality drugs, and we take actions against firms with poor CGMP or when other information calls into question the quality of drugs for U.S. patients. In summary, I thank you for your attention today, for your participation in the upcoming panel. If your question is not answered, you can reach out to me at my email address that's on the slide, and I will help you to get your question answered, whether it's through my office or through another sister office within the agency. So thank you again, and talk to you later.
Good morning. This is Commander Emily Thakur with the Drug Shortage Staff, here to give you a little overview of drug shortages. The drug shortage mission is to prevent, mitigate, and alleviate drug shortages. Patient and practitioner access to life-saving medication is our #1 priority. We work with professional organizations, patient groups, clinicians, as well as other stakeholders like other agencies and all our offices within the FDA. Let me give you a brief history of where we began. We started in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research in the Office of Antimicrobial Products. Just a small group working on a handful of shortages at a time. The program began back in 1999. Around 2009, 2010, there seemed to be a large uptick in shortages. We seem to see many manufacturing companies have whole lines go down at a time or have larger problems in manufacturing lines. Around 2011, President Obama signed an executive order to reduce prescription drug shortages, and in 2012, FDASIA was enacted, and that required industry to submit notifications to the FDA. We also had to create a task force and put forward a strategic plan, which we did. Our program became a staff and grew in size in 2012, and then we moved under the Office of the Center Director. The drug shortage staff has a big role, and the key role is communication, not just within the FDA with our other offices, which we do constantly. There is not one shortage person working on any given shortage. There's a group of 25 people working on any given shortage. If you think of all the offices we need to communicate with. We also work with pharmacists and patients as well as providers regularly, emailing back and forth, calling. We work with our international authorities, TGA, Health Canada, EMA. We work with other agencies, CMS, DEA, as well as manufacturers, and we work with a multitude of manufacturers, and we work with the manufacturers day in and day out, dealing with these notifications, dealing with potential issues, dealing with solutions to issues. And here's a little more on that notification requirement. So manufacturers are required to notify the FDA of permanent discontinuation in manufacturing of a certain finished product or an interruption in manufacturing of certain products that lead to a meaningful disruption in supply for products that are used for the U.S. They're supposed to provide at least 6 months notice in advance of a permanent discontinuation or interruption in manufacturing, and if they can't, they're supposed to submit as soon as practicable. These notifications are not limited to medically necessary products, and we need to hear about these notifications regardless of a manufacturer's market share, the number of companies marketing that same product, or volumes that may be in a wholesaler's hands. Drug shortages are defined by a period of time when the demand or projected demand for a drug within the U.S. exceeds the supply of the drug. In general, our staff focuses on shortages of medically necessary products that have significant effect on public health. We are notified of all products, and we do work on all products, but we do prioritize medically necessary products. And here's that definition. A medically necessary drug product is any drug product used to diagnose, treat, prevent a serious disease or medical condition for which there is no other drug that is judged by CDER's medical staff to be an appropriate substitute, or there is an inadequate supply of an acceptable alternative as determined by DSS. So our staff will make that determination, and that's why we want to make sure people submit notifications of anything. So even if they think they have a small share of the market, we'll let you know if that's an issue. Don't try and make that determination yourself. We encourage notifications in advance for any kind of change in manufacturing that could lead to a meaningful disruption, and in advance. So you may not have this issue, but we'd like to hear about it. Even if you're not sure, it may come to fruition. If you are able to avert the shortage yourself, great. Well, forget we talked. We won't do anything with that notification. But these are things we would like to hear about. Plans for upgrade or remediation, manufacturing issues, things like raw material batch failures, particulate issues, sterility issues. Even if these are things that once you look into it, root cause, you are able to fix the issue yourself. Maybe you did have another batch that you could use instead. Let us know. Let us know you've figured it out and there won't be an interruption. And that's great. That's all we need to know. And product refers to specific strength, dosage form, and route of administration. We want to hear about these notifications ahead of time, not after you can't fill your order and are unable to meet expected demand. Like we said, we'd rather prevent a shortage than have to fix a shortage or try and scramble to find a solution. FDA will work very closely with manufacturers to address problems. We're here to advise, we're here to assist. If we can expedite a review, we will. If we can expedite an inspection, we will try. But ultimately, a manufacturer must fix their problem. The only thing we in the FDA can do is, ensure that manufacturers submit notifications of permanent discontinuances. If they let us know of interruptions in manufacturing, and then give us a reason for those discontinuances. We cannot require any company to make a drug or make more of a drug, and we can't ask a company to distribute a drug to certain areas or certain hospitals or wholesalers. That's up to the company. So this is why I preach over and over that early notification is key. The more we know, the earlier we know, the more tools we have at hand to assist. What we're trying to do is make a risk-benefit decision on these products that potentially go into shortage or are going into shortage, and prioritize those that are medically necessary. We want to maintain availability while minimizing risk to patients. What does that mean? We want to assure that the risk that's inherent with the product due to whatever problem it's having is not going to be more risky to the patient rather than the risk of the patient not having product being the bigger issue. So if having a product that's not GMP is more beneficial to the patient, and we're able to minimize any risk, then that's the way we're going to go. So we rather keep product available to patients if we can. And so what we do is we work with the firms to address a problem while coming up with some type of more short-term solution. And we'll advise and assist and expedite what we can, but it's still on the manufacturer to fix the underlying issue. And of course, not all shortages can be prevented. There's always going to be unanticipated problems that occur, and we see that right now. There are hurricanes or tropical storms brewing. There are flooding and floods occurring right now. We have COVID, dealing with a pandemic. That was unanticipated. And for that was a huge increase in demand that we saw for certain products. So that was something that was unanticipated by us and unanticipated by the manufacturers. So we had to handle that. And then sometimes the alternative suppliers can't make up those shortfalls, or there aren't any. We're seeing less and less redundancy in products out there. So, one manufacturer's down, there might not be another one to pick up the supply. And sometimes, the issues are so big that a facility has to shut down. There are certain things that just can't be fixed and keep a line running at the same time. But we can work together on allocation programs if that's something, anything to try and keep a little product available for patients as long as we can. So I talked about our toolbox. Communication is key. So you let us know, we can start letting other manufacturers know. Not that we would call out a certain company. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't call out a certain market share, but we would let a company know that they might see an increase in demand. I'm sure any given company listening today has had a phone call from us similar to that about, letting you know you may see an increase in demand. Let us know if you're seeing an increase in demand and if you're able to handle it. So that at least gets you thinking about your supply chain, right? It prompts you to start looking at your own supply and demand if you're not already. We also, have some regulatory flexibility to assist with supply. Could be that, we put other safety measures in place. Maybe we would be able to release product with extra oversight at a plant. Maybe we could release a product with particulate if they had filter studies that showed that filtering the particulate out would make the product just as safe and effective as it was prior. There are a lot of things that we can do to provide regulatory flexibility if we don't have alternate manufacturers to assist. We expedite reviews, mentioned that before, get proposals from companies on how they may assist. Maybe they need a new manufacturing site, just a new line in their current site. Maybe we can extend expiration dating, source another material, anything we can do to assist. Or maybe we actually have other applications in-house for that same product, and we might expedite those reviews. In very rare cases, one of the last tools we have in our toolbox is importation of ex-US products. We tend to not go there if we don't need to, but if we do, we will look for outside sources. We've done it in the past, and it's been a tool that's really helped us when we've been in a bind. And we will get as much information from the company to make sure the product's safe and effective. We will get whatever information we can from that country's FDA sister agency. If it's, from Canada, we'll go to Health Canada. If it's Australia, we'll go to TGA. We'll ask them for their last inspections to make sure the product is safe. We won't use product that has not been used in other patients. So we want to make sure what we're giving to our U.S. patients is the most safe product available. And you can see here that with our ongoing dialogue, with the early notification, we can prevent more shortages. So during this COVID-19 pandemic, we also had to ensure that supplies remained. So some of the efforts that we took, in particular with the drug shortage staff, is we did very early outreach to manufacturers. And we've done this with other events in the past, or hurricanes that have occurred. We've sent a blast email out, and some have seen this, a blast email out to everyone to just see if anyone is having issues, to let us know if there's anything that the FDA can do, just kind of reminding folks of their notification requirement. Just giving people a heads up in case they're not really thinking about it, kind of just sparking that thought in someone's head. Maybe there's, maybe it's not the active ingredient. Maybe it's not the finished product. Maybe you have a supplier of your vials or a supplier of your labels that's coming from one of those areas where you were having an event. It helps, have people start thinking about potential issues and to let us know. And let us know if there's anything we can do. We're also working with all of our sister agencies. So, there might be something else we can coordinate. You need help with transportation. At least if you have an avenue and know you can come to us, we can then help you connect with other agencies that can help you coordinate on other issues. We did put a guidance out there, so where we need to know about any manufacturing interruptions, we also wanted to know about those increases in demand. We don't necessarily get those notifications. Some people do, and that's great, but it's not quite in the requirements, so we don't always get those. But during the pandemic, our biggest issues were increases in demand. So seeing those notifications was definitely helpful for us. But we did really the same protocol as our normal and drug shortage anyway. Still helping with expediting, still helping with regulatory flexibility, still talking to all the people we would talk to and getting information out like we would. So the biggest role is industry's role to help prevent and mitigate shortages. You really need to look at, the frailties in your own supply chain. Where are your stop gaps? Where are the places you break down? Even if it is your own communication, like you're not hearing from a facility with the timeliness that you need. You need to communicate to us early about potential shortages. If nothing happens, that's great. We're not going to throw it on our website. We're not going to go, tell the whole agency about it. We just want to kind of get ourselves, there aren't many of us in drug shortage. We want to get ourselves set up and ready to help if we need to act. But we do need postings on our website when there is a shortage that can't be avoided. And we need updates from you so we can have the most current information available for our patients and providers. We need short-term plans and long-term plans. Short-term plan might be something that uses regulatory flexibility just to get product out there or keep product out there. But we need your long-term plans too for your permanent fixes, and we're here to help with those too. But work with us. We want to minimize shutdowns and slowdowns that can lead to these shortages. We'd rather hear about an issue before a shutdown happens. Talk to us first. Maybe a shutdown is avoidable. Maybe we can, work out something where you can make the fixes that you need to make without shutting down. And if you can't, you can't. We understand. But, we want to make sure, and we know you want to make sure that there is product available for patients. So it's our goal, and it's I'm sure it's your goal as well. So I hope this was helpful for you. Please reach out to us if you have questions. Please download our mobile app if that's helpful for you to see shortages quicker. There's an RSS feed that you can subscribe to, get certain therapeutic products sent straight to you. This is the information. But thank you for your time, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you for those great presentations. We'll now transition into our Q&A session. If you haven't had a chance to enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now. The first group of questions will be directed to Commander Bizjak. And here's the first question for Commander Bizjak. Are there thoughts on having an emergency plan as part of the QS review during an inspection?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And that is a good question. At this point, we do not have thoughts about spending time during the inspection on reviewing an emergency plan. I think that's part of the proactive preparation that that your site can do in the event that there is a period of high absenteeism for any reason. Either pandemic or other reasons. So I don't believe that that is the plan, although I wouldn't be surprised if an investigator asks if you're aware of the guidance and if you have an emergency plan, although I wouldn't expect them to review it during an inspection. It may be something that you could actually have during an inspection available. So if an investigator is reviewing something that did occur on an inspection, that did occur during periods of high absenteeism, and they're looking to see why you made certain decisions and took a certain path, that may be something that's valuable on your end to share with the investigator. So that could be helpful as well as something to share during an inspection. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question is also directed to Commander Bizjak, and here's the question. Have you seen an increase in the number of the notifications following the 2011 guidance since COVID, or is it the same as pre-COVID?
So also an interesting question. I have seen an increase in the number of notifications since COVID, certainly, and I think since awareness of the guidance has grown and the availability of that guidance. So I think that I have seen an increase in the number of notifications.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a couple more questions for Commander Bizjak, and here's the next question. Do you know if the GUI for high absenteeism aligned or accepted by other centers such as CVM, or at least generally accepted to work with industry for these NMP?
Thank you for that question. And this guidance is published as a CDER guidance. It does not include other centers. And so I think the principles are fairly general and broad, but I wouldn't start to speak for other centers such as CVM. However, if you have specific questions for them and using this guidance, I'm happy to share them with CVM representatives or other centers as well. So, thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Commander Bizjak in this round, and this is the question. If any employee is found sick or showing any symptoms of COVID-19 during execution of the batch, then what should be the preventative actions to be taken with a partially executed batch?
So thank you for that question, and it's very, very practical question. And certainly these are the types of situations where it's really, really helpful to have a plan in place for what to do in specific scenarios. And it's really hard to tell because it may depend based on the type of manufacturing and the dosage form and how removed people are from the manufacturing. But really, of course, in terms of the drug product manufacturing, following 211.28 in terms of personnel responsibilities and removing any person that shows any kind of illness from manufacturing is an expectation. And considering further restrictions on their access to any other manufacturing area, beyond that required by the CGMP regulations and recommended by agency guidance and normal practice in order to limit the possibility of contamination. Now, if there is an actual contamination event identified, it's important to take the time to promptly clean and disinfect and sanitize the manufacturing area, and if necessary, sterilize affected equipment and surfaces, production areas and facilities before resuming manufacturing. But really, this is about having a plan in place to perform an investigation to determine the impact on the drug product that's made or the in-process material that you have. And any drug products or lots or batches of material that's determined to be adversely affected in terms of safety and quality must not be released for further manufacturing or for distribution, and those items must be properly dispositioned. So again, I think it's really about having a plan in place of what to do with that material and how to perform an appropriate investigation for the seriousness of the situation.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next group of questions will be directed to Commander Thakur. And here's the first question. How do you incentivize companies to come in with issues when companies may want to deal with the issues on their own? Also, how does a company know when to make the decision to come in and ask for help? Is there any guidance on that?
Thank you for the question. We don't have any formal guidance on that. It will be up to each company to decide if they want to come in and talk to us. But we really do want to encourage them to come to us and let us know what they're seeing, what's going on. Again, there's also not a requirement for them to do that, and we have no way to really incentivize you except for the fact that we're here to help you. So, if that, and we're also not going to do anything with that information, correct? We're going to hear you out about a potential issue. We'll let you work on it. You say, we're still, look, you haven't yet even figured out a root cause, maybe. We're not going to go run and start doing anything unless you come back to us and say, hey, it didn't go out the way we thought. It looks like we might run into a shortage issue, and then we'll start to work. But you've already, given us time to start thinking about what our alternate plans might need to be. So for us, it's giving us enough time to be able to help you. So that's the only encouragement or incentive that we have, is that, we're going to help you try and minimize any shortage of product to patients. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Commander Thakur is the following. Related to the rare cases, will the agency look to eventually prioritize review and approval in the U.S. for these products not initially approved in the U.S.?
Oh, that's a great question. We hope that every product that we import would be willing to submit an application and come in for full FDA approval. If we are in that scenario where we are importing, then that is most likely means that we only have, one or two players that are FDA approved. So having an additional FDA approval is something we would love to see. So we would definitely work with manufacturer of that ex-US source, and we've done it before. We've had a couple that we were able to get in and get a full FDA approval. So we have an additional source available for our US patients. So of course, yes, we would love to get additional applications in-house for those ex-US products. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Commander Thakur is the following. In slide 14, with the prevented U.S. drug shortages per year showing more CBER products were prevented from going into shortage, is that what it's showing? And is the graph showing that there were not any prevented CBER drug shortages prior to 2016?
That's a good question. I'm happy to clarify. So yes, CBER has been able to prevent more shortages, I believe, every year since they've been notifying. And that was with the final guidance that CBER was also required to, or companies were required to also notify on CBER shortages as well. And so part of our under FDASIA is that we do an annual report to Congress on what we've seen over the past year, and that's where those numbers are coming from and first placed. So CBER has only been required to provide those prevented numbers and number of shortages that they've had since the final regulation was put in place. So I'm sure CBER, I don't have the date where CBER started their shortage program, but there have been CBER shortages, there have been prevented shortages from CBER, but we've only been placing it in our report to Congress in the last several years.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Commander Thakur before going back to Commander Bizjak. And here is the question for Commander Thakur. If a company has a drug available that is posted on the drug shortage list, how can they notify FDA?
So on my very last slide, I had placed information, contact information. I am hoping that these slides will be made available to you at some point. Otherwise, if you find our drug shortage page, it will have email where you can email us any queries, including, hey, I make this product, I'm interested in making it for the US market, any questions, and we'll get back to you very quickly on how you can assist. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. We'll go back now to Commander Bizjak with the following group of questions. The first question is there a deadline as to when companies may apply the high absenteeism guidance? And if not, will the agency notify when the guidance will no longer be allowed to be put in place?
So thank you for that question. This guidance was finalized in 2011. It has been an active published final guidance since then. There's no formal activation of being able to use this guidance that's really needed. In the introduction, it says that this is to be used during emergencies that result in high absenteeism at production facilities. Even though it was written in response to the H1N1 pandemic, it's not only for pandemic situations. There may be other situations, other kinds of natural disasters that and other scenarios that may result in high absenteeism at production facilities. And so this guidance is out there to use and to have an emergency plan, integrate that into your continuity of operations planning, so there's no. It's not limited to just when, for example, a U.S. national emergency has been put in place.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Commander Bizjak is the following. Have you seen the principles of the high absenteeism guidance applied in non-medically necessary drugs, such as like non-application OTC products? Is this an approach that can be justified with documentation and controls you referenced?
Thank you for that question, and it's not an easy question. Certainly, the CGMP applies, and it's critical that patients are getting safe and effective drugs that have the quality that is necessary to ensure the product is suitable for use, is fit for use, and so we've been using, we use a risk-based approach. We encourage companies to use a risk-based approach within the structure of, being in compliance with CGMP. So I have not seen the principles in the high absenteeism guidance applied for non-medically necessary drugs. Certainly, that's the focus of the guidance and the scope and the intent of the guidance. However, the resuming normal operations guidance is intended for the entire industry. So if there are scenarios where you have where a manufacturer has made that determination to use that risk-based approach, that even though it's not part of the recommendations in the high absenteeism guidance, there are recommendations in the resuming normal operations guidance in order to evaluate, remediate any decisions that you made. Now, that may be evaluated on inspection, and we'll definitely look to ensure that the product is still safe for use, has the appropriate quality that is required, and that would be for all drug products. So I wouldn't say that this approach could be justified with that particular guidance, but certainly, we know that this is a time when manufacturers are operating outside of their normal operations, and so we'll be looking at the approaches that you take and the decisions that you make to ensure that the product is suitable and for the patient.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Commander Bizjak. How can we find out when foreign inspections, particularly in India, for OAI firms will occur?
So another great question. If you look at the guidance on remote interactive evaluations, and my colleagues will be talking about this later in the session, the guidance states that after issuance of a warning letter, an OAI out of compliance for drug CGMP, for example, a warning letter, holding a regulatory meeting, or following an enforcement action, FDA usually will conduct an inspection to confirm that corrective actions have been implemented. As for the timing of those inspections, that's not something that I can speak to at this point, and I defer the question for the third panel with Office of Regulatory Affairs.
Thank you for responding to that question. We've got a few minutes left, and we're going to go back over to Commander Thakur for the following question. Many times, drugs show up on the ASHP website, but are never shown on the FDA site. Does the FDA monitor this site, and how do they work with pharmacists?
That's a great question. And actually, if you check our website, we do have a comparison between ASHP's site and our site, and we do work with them very closely. But basically, our shortage list is intended for national shortages. So it lets you know when product is unavailable anywhere nationally, or very hard to get. Manufacturers are not meeting demand. What is on ASHP's site, that site is geared towards pharmacists and practitioners who are looking for product. So they may have one manufacturer who is out, and so pharmacists might need to look to see where else they might get it, what other manufacturers have product available. So there may not be a national shortage. If we go to the alternate manufacturers, they may be able to completely meet the supply for everyone that needs it, but your manufacturer is out. ASHP is making sure pharmacists know where to get order medication from. So there's a difference between what's on their site and what's on our site. It does always, I feel like it gives us a heads up of something that might be coming, but it might not. It might be easily covered by the alternate manufacturers. But it's a great question. We do get that one a lot. Thank you.
Well, we're all out of time for questions. We want to thank all of our presenters for their very informative and timely talk, and also for responding to numerous questions that came in. We'll now transition